right, I just wanted to talk a little bit about breathing. It's a big topic these days. There are a lot of different approaches, a lot of different methods out there now. I don't tend to use most of the popular methods in my work. You've got things like Wim Hof and holotropic breath work and things like this. Um, Mainly because the way I see it and the way I approach it, this rapid kind of breathing definitely stirs up the insides, right? It gets things moving. It's very young, it's quick, it's short, it's sharp, and so it'll circulate stuff, which has its value for some people, but many people are already running a little bit too fast internally, and so for those people, it can also be detrimental. With the approach that I use, it's always contextual. Depending on the person, it may be too much for them to go into these methods. Sure, it can stir things up and it can make funky experiences, but it often doesn't stick. So I prefer to approach from the other side of things first, to actually slow down and anchor the breath to begin with, and maybe explore those more kind of faster methods a bit later down the track after the breath is really solidified. What I want to really approach in this video is the concept of the control of breath. Typically, we have two big portions of the population. You have the people who think breath training is weird and a waste of time because they breathe all the time anyway. They haven't stopped breathing. Why do they need to train it? And then you have people who have learnt methods of controlling the breath and regulating the breath that have found a lot of value in those methods. In my approach, I see both of those as two extremes, right? You have ignorance, where I'm just not paying attention to something, and a kind of method of control where I am paying attention to something, but when I pay attention to it, I control it. From the start of all my teachings, I promote third way as well. Of course, we're going to have times in our life where we're not paying attention to our breath. This is totally fine. It's natural and actually, unavoidable. Then we definitely need regulation time, time to control the breath and push it to be better than it is. But we need plenty of time, most of all in this world where everyone's a little bit too over-dialed on the control of everything, right? There's kind of fear that if I don't control it, something bad will happen, that I don't really trust the unconscious to do its job. It needs to do it where I don't pay attention to it, or if I do pay attention to it, I've got to put the claws in and kind of control it. So I'm promoting mostly this third way of doing things where I pay attention to it but don't control it. This is a thing we don't see too often in any of these communities, at least as far as I've seen. Of course, you see this method in a lot of Buddhist style meditations where the breath becomes the object of the meditation. You just let the breath do its thing. But the overarching purpose is to study how the attention and the awareness work. So it's not really a study of the breath per se. This overarching intent can also change things. Then if I enter a practice with a particular goal in mind, it will change how I interact and relate to that practice. We can use the same basic function where I pay attention to my breath and I don't manipulate it and don't change it, for the purpose of allowing the breath to regulate itself. And this changes the tone of the practice already, just having this concept. And it's a really effective tool to use, particularly if you've been regulating your breath. Most people who haven't done any breath practice, who are on the side of have just ignored their breath for most of their life, when they first enter into practice, it's better to do some basic regulation. And you'll see this in the tutorial that I filmed that I encourage you to watch after this video. But from that point of regulation and from the beginning, I train my students and anyone who's interested in this method to then release the regulation, release the intent, release the control we have on the breath, and then pay attention to the breath and see what it does, see how it integrates or not the controls we put in. So for example, if my breath is normally a little bit shallow, it's a little bit in the top of my chest, when I'm not paying attention to it. And so I learn a breathing technique for the first time that is maybe like abdominal breath, where I force my breath or control my breath to go low. And as I breathe in, I make my belly expand. And as I breathe out, I make myself relax. And I'm really like purposefully and intentfully slowing my breath down and regulating my breath so I make an abdominal breath appear. This is a nice starting point. But if I keep that control on too long, then at some point my system's going to get a little bit stagnant. It's going to kind of build up a weird pressure that if I don't release that pressure, I'm going to have problems. What I want to do is engage with a technique like that or any other technique, regulate the breathing to some sort of, you know, ideal state, whatever ideal state you're working towards. There's plenty of different ideals we can work towards. And from there, release the regulation while paying attention to the breath. This is a crucial point I don't see taught very often. So as we release our regulation, but still pay attention, it gives the body, it gives the unconscious a chance to kind of integrate the changes that were revealed by the control, right? Because when I control my breath, I tend to find, oh, it's a little bit tight. You know, there's a bit of anxiety that comes up when I make my breath that slow or anything like this. And so if I kind of stir it up just a little bit and then release the control, then I'll give my unconscious a chance to absorb. This is a really key point in the way that I teach breathing to my students. So I always introduce a technique, and there's plenty of them, a million billion different techniques that involve all sorts of things. But I always, at the end of the technique, release back to a kind of organic, ungoverned breath where I'm just paying attention to my breath, but I'm not controlling it. So that's the first point. The second point is, which part of the breath do I pay attention to? Very often, and I did this myself a lot until I heard this cue come from Damon Mitchell, I think was the first person I heard present it, that we can pay attention to the pathway of the breathing, you know, follow the air in through the nose into the lungs and back out again, which is a very young aspect of the breath, right? It's moving, it's a process, it's in motion. Or I can pay attention to the yin aspect. The yin aspect is the structures which facilitate this pathway, right? So I'm talking about the actual flesh of the nose, the flesh and bones of the nasal cavities here, of all the kind of back of the throat, the larynx and pharynx, and down past the tonsils and the airways, and then the structures of the lungs themselves, right? And so when we're paying attention to the breathing from the structural perspective, we invite more of a yin dynamic into things, which actually anchors things and slows them down far more effectively than if we follow the yang process of the breathing. And this can be a real game changer for a lot of people. So if you haven't tried this, maybe you've been breathing for a long time and following the breath in and out, try actually paying attention to the structures themselves rather than the passage of air, right? So I feel the nostrils, I feel the walls of the nose, I feel these structures, which of course will be stimulated by the movement of air between it, but my attention is doing something very different. My attention is still and resting, you know, in the structure of the nose, and I'm feeling this air move past, but I'm not moving my mind around. That's really, really important. I'm not moving my point of attention around. And this can have an incredible impact on actually building this kind of slow and stable breath, more so than following the breath pathway in and out. So those two things I really wanted to highlight and emphasize. Of course, there's a lot of details in how to do this, and I can't hardly go over the 10 million details in a 15-minute YouTube video. But if you want to go into those details, I do have a full 8-week breathing course, which actually goes week by week into all of them, and a lot of technical methods too. So you can check that out if that's something that takes your fancy. Otherwise, make sure you check out my next video. It's going to be a kind of guided breathing practice that you can do at home. I'm going to keep it reasonably short so it becomes accessible to people who aren't really used to doing, like, you know, 30 or 60-minute breathing sessions. So I'll keep it between 10 and 15 minutes and have a go and see how you go. I'll cue these things that I talked about in this video in that follow along. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to learn more or support my work, head on over to my website, craigmallet.com. You're also welcome to join my community, which can be found at community.craigmallet.com or via the menu on my main website. I generally have a number of services available. If you'd like some help, just reach out. I have a student program, I have online courses, I have workshops and private consultations, all available to any who would want it. As always, to appease the algorithm gods, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and/or share.